It's been a very tough year plus for everyone, and according to the latest from the Toronto Foundation's annual Vital Signs report, it really amplified difficulties that people were already having. Joining us now to explain, in Pickering, Ontario, Garima Talwar Kapoor. She is Director of Policy and Research at Maytree, an anti-poverty nonprofit. And in Ontario's capital city, right downtown at Yonge and Bloor, there's Julia Howell, who is the Chief Program Officer for the Toronto Foundation. And it's nice to see both of you back on TVO tonight. Let me just take a moment here and go through some of the highlights of the Vital Signs report. For example, a quarter of the people in Ontario's capital city are struggling to make ends meet. That is 650,000 people in the city of Toronto. Shelter use increased in June 2021, right after the eviction ban ended. 56,000 people are relying on food banks. There is limited to no affordable rental availability for the bottom 40% of earners, and all of this during a time that saw unprecedented wealth creation in the housing and stock markets. Julia, get us started here. How much of this increase in inequality, in your judgment, was because of the pandemic?
There's no doubt about it that the pandemic has made the situation so much worse. We knew about our growing inequality. We've been tracking it for 4 or 5 years through Vital Signs, but COVID exacerbated everything. We saw huge increases in net worth of Canadians with a record 1.8 trillion. And at the same time, as your graphic just showed, 1 in 4 Torontonians is struggling just basically to make ends meet.
And
there are lots of other... Sorry,
I was just going to ask Garima to follow up on that. Any question in your mind that the pandemic exacerbated the circumstances that were already difficult for too many?
Absolutely not. I think it's what the pandemic has done is made it absolutely clear that these inequalities exist and that the grave cleavages that we see across neighborhood lines, across income lines, across race and ethnicity lines, and the converging impacts of all of these has been made profoundly more clear through the pandemic.
Julia, there's one part of the report some people might find curious, and that is it said that more people accessed food banks in Ontario's capital city in 2021 than in 2020. That despite the fact that presumably more people are vaccinated, more people are going back to work, more people theoretically ought to be better off. Why would that be?
Well, we're just speculating, of course, but presumably people had friends and family and others that they might be able to rely on in a pinch. But as unemployment continued and precarious work grew, people's situations became more dire and they had no choice but to go to a food bank.
Can I also, Garima, follow up with you on the CERB, which is an acronym everybody, of course, in Canada knows now, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. $2,000 a month to people who lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. And the report points out that that is a much more generous benefit than, say, ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program, or Ontario Works, so-called welfare. What do you infer from all of that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's really important to know that people who receive social assistance were less likely to benefit from a program like CERB than other unemployed Canadians. And that's because of the eligibility criteria that CERB had. And so when we think about who is showing up at food banks, who is showing up at our shelters, it's really important to note that the people that live in deepest poverty across Canada did not benefit from federal income supports. And so when we think about, the $2,000 in CERB per month that was available to recipients, I think it tells us something about what, as a government and as people, we think the bare necessity is needed to live a life with dignity. The ODSP rates for a single adult in Ontario is $1,169, and for a single adult on Ontario Works or receiving Ontario Works, their maximum benefit is $733 a month, which is woefully short of that 2,000. But I would hazard to say, as much we definitely need to increase the rates for people living in deep poverty and receiving social assistance. But as we've seen through the pandemic, public services really matter to people. And as we think about increasing the rates that are available through our income support programs, we also need to think about a holistic package of public services that are available to everybody who needs them.
Julia, I guess I should point out that the CERB is a federal program, while ODSP and Ontario Works are provincial programs. And every provincial government, in my memory, has always said, the feds have got the money printing machine, so they can afford to be more generous in what they do. We can't really be that generous as a province. What's your view on that?
Well, there's one person that's struggling in the end, and that's what we have to remember. So I think it's high time we all just got together and accepted that there's a growing underclass in this city that needs help. And whether it's federal supports, provincial supports, municipal supports, or indeed the charitable sector, we all need to care about this growing issue because it impacts on all of us.
Garima, do you sense any political will to, now that we've seen what CERB can do, to increase the allocations that go to people who need this support going forward?
That's a really interesting question, Steve. And, trying to not put my jaded hat on, I really do hope that there is a willingness to think through, intergovernmental collaboration on how we increase income supports for people living in poverty. We know through the Canada Child Benefit, through the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors, that a base benefit of supports for these groups has really helped to reduce poverty. And so what I would say is that we know that single adults across Canada face the highest rates of living in poverty. And so what I would encourage is a federal benefit that really supports low income working age singles, and so that we develop that that suite of targeted incomes at different demographic groups, and then ones that can supplement and stack on top of benefits like social assistance, so that we don't just have one benefit that is provided to everyone, but a suite of benefits and a diversity of benefits that is reflective of the diversity of need across Canada, across Ontario, and across Toronto.
Anybody in the federal government thinking about that right now, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no, but that doesn't mean that they aren't acutely aware of the issues that exist. And so what we're all hoping to do is push the federal government to really recognize that that the labor market that exists today is fundamentally different than the one that existed 2 or 3 decades ago. And so this idea that people need to be incentivized into work or need to be discouraged to remain on supports is reflective of a labor market that didn't have the underbelly of precarity existing. And so now that we know that the nature of work, especially for low and moderate income workers, is precarious, and that there's a lot of churn in the labor market, people that go into income supports and then come back off and then go back in, we need innovative thinking when it comes to income supports, and it requires the federal government to extend their arm and their hand in doing this. And I do hope that, like we've seen on other files in housing, for example, that other orders of government will be happy to take the help where they can.
Well, let me pick up on housing and going back to the Vital Signs report. Julia, you've talked about shelters, and I wonder if during the course of the pandemic, what the status of shelter space availability to people who needed that space, what was it like?
Well, we remember at the beginning of the pandemic when shelters, of course, like everywhere, had to enact social distancing measures. There were fewer beds. Tent encampments grew. There were 80 encampments across the city, so it was a very glaring reality for all of us that homelessness was an issue we had to pay attention to. Of course, the city, shut those down, and there's been a growth in hotel spaces made available. So it shows that there's been some adaptability in the system, which I think is a positive thing. There have been all sorts of solutions posed to address what's been a long-term crisis in available housing and affordable housing. And, we're optimistic that we're going to see some changes here that'll be long-term and will ensure that people can live in dignity, as Garima mentioned.
Well, the time has flown by here. We're literally down to our last minute and a half here. And Garima, let me give it to you to speak to this. People may feel that the problems are so profound, there just aren't solutions out there. And I'm wondering if you believe there are policy levers that can be pulled in order to help solve some of these issues we've been talking about.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I often think that people think, oh, we've tried everything that's out there, and we haven't. What I often think is that, especially when it comes to housing, we need to think about regulation as much as we think about investments. We need to think about supply side ideas to increase the supply of affordable and deeply affordable housing, but we also need to think about demand side solutions that help people pay their rent, that help people who are in arrears from their rent to help stabilize their tenancies. And so, at the City of Toronto over the past week, there has been a lot of criticism lobbed at the City of Toronto when it comes to their failure to vote to legalize rooming houses across the city. That doesn't mean that this work is over. In fact, at the City of Toronto at the end of this month, we've got a vote coming up on inclusionary zoning, which will require developers to have certain amounts and proportions of the units that they develop dedicated to affordable housing. And that's on the regulatory side that the city can do today. We know that with the federal government and with the municipalities, that there's a lot of investment in modular housing and the rapid housing initiative. I think that it's high time that we think of the role of housing as a public service and how we increase the number of publicly funded homes that we actually have across the province. There's a federal lands initiative that exists. The province, has been a bit meek in its role in promoting affordable housing, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a role to play and that it's too late for them to play a role. I think that a Scotiabank report said that we are in a housing supply shortage of 1.8 million homes. A recent report by Mike Moffat across Ontario noted a shortage of 1 million homes. And the question is, what type of homes are we building and for who are we building? And once we start to ask those questions and we start to think about the regulatory nature and the investments that need to take in place, that need to be made in tandem, I do think that this housing crisis that we're in can be mitigated and can be resolved, but it requires courage and it requires out of the box thinking that brings people along, which, I'm really hopeful that we're finally there to do that.
Well, we cover the Vital Signs Report, I think, pretty much every year on this program because it has always got important information in it to give you the sense of the pulse of what's going right and wrong in Ontario's capital city. So we thank the Toronto Foundation for that, and we thank Garima and Julia for coming on our program tonight to talk about it. Well done, you two.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.